Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webcast brought to you by Compliance Week. I'm Arti Maharaj, Digital Content Editor, and I'll be hosting today's webcast. Today, we're going to be talking about managing change more effectively across regulations, risk, and business. And before we hear from our guest today, let me quickly go over the agenda for this afternoon. We're scheduled to go for 1 hour. I am going to give a brief introduction, and then we'll jump right into the panel discussion sponsored by IBM. That presentation will be followed by a question and answer session. Your questions will be kept confidential and anonymous, so please don't be shy. You can ask your question at any time using the Ask a Question function on the left-hand side of your screen. And I'll post them to our guests at the end of our presentation. After the Q&A, I'll wrap up the webcast. This webcast will also offer CTE credit for all attendees. Please disable your pop-up blockers in order to access the exam. To obtain your CTE credit, wait until the webcast is completely over and I sign off. At that point, the final examination will be presented automatically in a separate window. Again, please ensure your pop-up blockers are disabled. If you have trouble viewing the CTE test or receiving the CTE certificate, please send an email to info@complianceweek.com to request a copy. I'll repeat these instructions at the end of the webcast. If you missed anything, stay tuned. A few other administrative details. At any time during the presentation, listeners can download the slides from the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of your screen. You can also hit the View Slide Full Screen button at the bottom of your screen if you wish to increase the slide size. And lastly, a Help button is located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for assistance. Today's webcast is part of the series that Compliance Week launched a few years ago. We hold these webcasts just about every week, usually on Thursdays, and our guests have been Chief Compliance and Governance Officers at leading public companies and experts on various compliance, regulatory, governance, and risk topics. I'm not going to read the upcoming schedule, but you can certainly visit www.complianceweek.com for details or to register. In addition, Compliance Week is now offering in-depth reports on subjects relevant to compliance, audit, and risk executives. For more information, visit www.complianceweek.com/reports. So on to today's webcast. We have the following panelists. To begin is Soumya Chakravarty. Soumya is a director in Capital One's Enterprise and Operational Risk Management Group and serves as a product owner for the Open Pages GRC platform. In a career spanning nearly 19 years, most of which has been spent working for a number of Big Four management consulting companies, Soumya has helped medium and large-scale enterprises solve complex business problems around IT audit, SOX, and regulatory compliance, and also operational risk management. Soumya is an experienced speaker and has presented at a number of conferences on various risk management topics, including being a presenter for Vision 2014. Next is Laura Paula. Laura has worked in the risk domain for over 12 years and has been a speaker at various conferences and webinars on industry risks highlighted by knowledge gained from the years of experience plus research efforts for Algo First database. Her career tenure has spanned financial and energy utility sectors, and her focus has been in regulated industries for the bulk of her career. She specializes predominantly in operational and enterprise risk management. And Laura currently works in the Risk Analytics Division of IBM as the Global Head of GRC Product Management and Content, where she guides the product team and strategy as well as thought leadership. And finally is Michael Rasmussen. Michael is an internationally recognized pundit on governance, risk, and compliance, also known as GRC, with specific expertise on the topic of enterprise GRC, GRC technology, corporate compliance, and policy management. With over 18 years of experience, Rasmussen has helped organizations improve GRC processes, design and implement GRC architecture, and select technologies that are effective, efficient, and agile. He is also a sought-after keynote speaker, author, and advisor, and is noted as the father of GRC, being the first to define and model the GRC market in 2002 while at Forrester. We're glad to have you all here. So, Michael, why don't you get us started?
Certainly, and it's a pleasure to be here with everybody. One of the questions that we often get is just what GRC is about. What is GRC? GRC versus ERM and ORM. We have lots of different acronyms, and when I first defined a model to market and labeled it GRC, there's a natural flow to it from my perspective. And GRC by definition, and I'm using the OSEG GRC capability model definition that I helped contribute to, is that GRC is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and acting with integrity. The reliable achievement The reliable achievement of objectives is the governance function, while addressing uncertainty is risk management and acting with integrity is compliance. And there's a natural flow, as I was just mentioning, to that order, in which governance sets the context for risk management. Without a governance function to steer and guide the organization and set context, why would we even do risk management? The risk management requires a context to manage risk within, and governance helps set that context. Now, obviously, a result of our risk assessments and things might mean that we change that context, but we can't put the cart before the horse, and so we need to make sure that there's the governance sets the context for risk, and then there's a follow-through for risk, and that gets into compliance, acting with integrity. Whether it's regulatory obligations, contractual obligations, or just boundaries and controls we put in place to mitigate risk, we need to make sure that it's happening in the organization, which becomes a compliance function, the acting with integrity. Basically, do we live up to what we commit the organization to? Now, organizations themselves, want to be high-performing. Now, a high-performing race car, just doesn't have a great engine. It's also got good brakes and steering and good handling. And that's a lot of what GRC is about. It's not there to stop the organization. It's there to help keep it on the road and safe so that the organization can be high-performing, what at OSEG we call principled performance. Now, one of the greatest challenges organizations are dealing with, and the focus of our webinar today, is managing GRC in the context of change. And change is impacting risk management and compliance management and just GRC broadly. We have a legal and regulatory change, changing laws, rules, regulations, enforcement actions, administrative decisions and rulings. And in some industries like financial services, we've tripled the amount of regulatory change in just 5 to 6 years. I know that in 2008, there was about 8,700 changes to laws, rules, regulations impacting financial services globally. About half those are for the U.S. In 2013, each year it had gone up, it was 26,950 changes. Again, about half those coming from North America. Lots of legal and regulatory change. We have changes in our external risk environment and changes in geopolitical risk, competitive forces and market forces. The industry, society, and technology demands change. For the past couple of years, many of our organizations have been working on building bring your own device policies and managing that risk, because technology and society demands have changed in which our employees want to bring their own devices into work, and how do we deal with that? But we might, spend a lot of resources keeping up with regulatory change and risk change and feel that we understand those external environments well. Perhaps. Most of us on the phone might say that we're not even doing that well. But, that's not good enough, because, we can understand all the laws and regulations inside and out, and might even have, the best drafted policies and those things to meet those regulatory requirements. But if the business is changing behind us and not compliant, then everything still failed. So we have changing strategy and processes and technology. We have new employees coming in the organization. Others have changed roles and responsibilities. Business relationships. We live in a day and age in which, what we used to call an insider just isn't a synonym for an employee anymore. The word insider used to mean employee 20, 30 years ago. Now, half of the insiders of an organization are not employees. They're contractors, consultants, temporary workers, outsourcers, service providers, suppliers, vendors, agents, brokers, dealers, you name it. And they're constantly changing, and their business is changing. We live in a day and age where one of the largest credit card breaches in history, being the Target breach, the doorway into the compromise of a point-of-sale system was an HVAC vendor, a heating and air conditioning vendor. That's the complexity of our operations and business now. And then we have mergers and acquisitions happening, which bring in completely redundant risk and compliance practices and processes that we need to integrate instead of letting live indefinitely out there. The organization is challenged by trying to keep all this change in sync. And it's not just one area, but all these areas as they impact each other and impact GRC. But at that time, when I talk to organizations, they're often telling me that they're struggling because they have an inability to gain a clear view of risk dependencies. You know, we put a lot of time and effort into building hierarchies of risk and categorizing risk, but when risk materializes, it often crosses those hierarchies. And how do we deal with it? How do we understand when there's different management of risk in different parts of the organization and be able to bring all that together? We have the high cost of consolidating risk and other compliance type information. I had one financial services organization tell me that 80% of their risk and compliance and audit resources was nothing more than document reconcilers because they were dealing with thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails and trying to compile reports and make sense out of it. A lot of cost, 80% of their staff's time. And at that time, there's difficulty maintaining accurate information, failing to trend across different periods, you know, limited abilities for correlation and comparison. And then we have all the change happening in the environment and just trying to keep up, and organizations often fail. So let's step back and talk about what I call GRC by design, or a federated GRC architecture. Now, a lot of organizations, and from my point of view, everybody on the phone does GRC. Whether you call it GRC or ERM or XYZ or ABC, or most likely you don't even have a name for it. Every organization has some approach to governance, risk management, and compliance, whether it's sort of ad hoc and fly by the seat of our pants to a defined, integrated, and disciplined program. And so every organization does GRC, whether you call it GRC or not. The question is, how can we do it better? Now, a lot of us have struggled because we've had very decentralized GRC practices, where there's a lot of different parts of the organization doing their things in their way without a lot of coordination between those departments and collaboration and sharing of information. The natural reaction to address the decentralized issues, some organizations say, well, we should centralize everything. And in that context, you know, that's not necessarily the right approach, particularly for large organizations, because we can't put all these people that different roles and responsibilities for GRC, such as security and compliance and ethics and legal and audit and risk, all under one head. We would lose something. We would lose proper checks and balances, balance of power, segregation of duties. You know, audit shouldn't be defining a GRC program and managing GRC, because then you'd have a fox guarding the hen house. You know, audit's there to provide assurance on GRC. And so we have different roles and responsibilities. And in that context, there's different ways to measure and model risk. The way we look at a hazard risk or a security risk is going to be very different from the way we look at a financial risk or an investment risk. And we have different techniques to model and analyze those risks. And so we need to have a very distributed capability where we have the ability to manage risk and compliance at a department level in the context that it makes sense at that department, but be able to aggregate and normalize information and be able to roll things up for an overall enterprise view. And that's what I call federated GRC. Instead of completely decentralized and disconnected, to be able to have, you know, a central governance framework for GRC, but allow some level of autonomy in different parts of the organization, but integration into that governance framework and for reporting purposes. Organizations that integrate GRC, and I prefer not to talk about consolidating because consolidating has this tone of centralization, but integrating GRC, where you have different parts of the organization, including the technology elements of it, that come together to form a GRC architecture, and not necessarily a GRC platform. There could be a core platform that manages GRC, but I think we put too much emphasis on GRC platforms and need to understand better GRC architecture and how all these pieces come together. And organizations that have an integrated GRC architecture, whether it is a platform approach or multiple different types of technologies, but at the core they're integrating in collaboration at the process and people level as well. Those that have an integrated GRC architecture of varying levels compared to the siloed approach that's very disconnected, you'll find that they have much greater satisfaction in the ability to share common process and information, be able to track performance across the enterprise, to monitor risks, and to monitor compliance as well. And more particularly, what I find very interesting is that there's significant greater confidence in the ability to understand risk in context of business performance, objectives, and strategy. And so those are important elements to consider. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to our host, because those are my introductory comments to introduce our panel today in the discussion topic. And I'll sit aside as I'm a part of the panel now, and we'll interact on a series of questions.
Great. Thank you, Michael. That was a great presentation. And thank you very much for setting the stage for our discussion. I guess my first question is, in your view, what do you think are the greatest GRC challenges that organizations face today?
From my perspective, it's exactly what I was just saying in the fact that it's dealing with change. Trying to keep abreast of legal and regulatory change, risk change, and business change, and keeping all those different areas in sync with each other, that's one of the greatest challenges. Another big challenge is, how do we build a strategy that crosses departments and meets the individual department's needs as well as the enterprise overview of GRC as well.
Great. And my second question goes to Soumya. What is the biggest letter in GRC? Is it the G, the R, or the C?
Thanks, Arti. So it's an interesting question, and it depends as to how you want to look at it. And for example, Michael explained that GRC stands for governance, risk, and compliance. I've actually heard a lot of people articulate GRC as governance, risk, and controls. And we really have to understand what is the scope under which governance, risk, and compliance is run within the context of an organization. So as you heard Michael say that, the governance is basically serves as the context for a risk management function, and sometimes traditionally compliance is almost as an outcome of if you do have good governance and have sound risk management practices, compliance just becomes an outcome. On the other hand, a lot of organizations, especially starting from the lower end of the maturity scale, they're more reactive to the external regulatory pressures and internal policy guidelines. And for them, it's really the compliance that is the centerpiece of the attention in terms of implementing a GRC program. And then as their maturity grows over the years, they tend to scale towards more of a let's manage risk more holistically, and in order to manage risk more holistically, let's stand up sound governance practices. So you can see that although my argument is that the governance tends to be the more overarching principle based on which GRC or GRC principles are established. Most organizations start from a very reactive end of trying to meet with certain types of regulatory compliance, whether it be Sarbanes-Oxley or any other type of regulatory guidance or regulatory requirements, and move along the scale of then harmonizing across multiple compliance and risk management, and then establishing the governance factors.
Thank you for that, Soumya. I'm just curious to know, so you said initially that in some cases you hear governance, risk, and controls as opposed to governance, risk, and compliance. Do you think that controls, and this can go out to the entire panel, is that something you hear more in the financial industry? Or do you think it differs depending on the type of industry?
Not necessarily, because controls are ubiquitous to every organization, and you need good controls to manage risk. And therefore, controls are seen sometimes as part of that whole middle R, which is risk management, or they can be seen as an independent activity or a process by itself, your controls management. And certainly, companies spend a lot of time, energy, and resources in getting to the right mix or right tuning of controls, because as Michael was saying that you should not have a GRC system or process that basically slows you down in terms of performance. On the other hand, you don't want to have what we call as the wild west, where there's very minimal controls and you're subjected to a lot of external risks or threats or compliance failures. So getting to that right mix of controls is more of an art than a science, honestly. And so to perfectly understand the controls, one would argue that you need to understand the risk very well.
And in that context, from a GRC label, I know that some do talk about the C as control, but really we're talking about governance process, risk management process, and in that context, compliance process. control is much more of a state. Are the controls we define for compliance, whether it's compliance to regulations or mitigating controls for risk and boundaries we put on risk? Compliance is the process for ensuring controls, while the state control ends up being much more of a state. And in the process of compliance, we also have policies, and a lot of policies govern the controls. So like we might have a password policy that tells us the length of password, the frequency of change of password, and the complexity of passwords. All those are controls that get implemented in the environment. And compliance really manages that overall process of understanding, what was decided on the risk side as well as the regulatory requirements, and being able to determine what the proper policy is and enforce and monitor those controls that are established to mitigate risk.
Right. I agree, and I think that part of it gets down to what Soumya said about risk. I mean, it's about risk appetite, understanding how far you want to go, so therefore your controls will, come into play in terms of, how much risk the institution wants to absorb or not.
Great, and thank you for that, Laura. And since we are discussing this, let's move on to a question that I have here for you. You had identified previously that change is the greatest GRC challenge facing organizations across industries today. How do you think organizations should go about managing change in the context of GRC?
I'm going to build on some of the theme that we've been talking about so far, and I think Michael said it, and I'm pretty sure Soumya said it as well. I mean, it's not about the systems. There is a foundational aspect to it, and that comes more, in my mind, around methodologies and how you choose to look at the data also, too, that you collect around these, various programs for governance, risk, and compliance. Because if you want to break down silos, and you want to ensure that everybody in the institution understands that, how they're involved in helping to ensure that controls are met or processes are followed, and ensure that there's an understanding of what the risks are, that I think that, those foundations have to be there. And I mean, especially like Michael was talking about in that, the amount of regulatory change that's been in certainly financial institutions industry, and a variety of other industries as well. I mean, it's, looking the post-Target, post-Sony world, there's been so much that's gone on that have showed us that it's an ever-adapting environment, and it's going into areas that we perhaps had not previously looked at in a very much depth. So if you have some kind of good backbone by which that you're collecting all this information and it talks to each other regardless of what the systems are, and that your people in the institution understand how to react when there's things that happen that they need to be mindful of, whether it's from a process perspective or a failure of a process, those are things that are extremely critical. And definitely there's a lot of adaptation that's happening in institutions today, and a lot of it's being driven by, I think, the pace of technology, globally. Period.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea of adaptation. It kind of goes back to Soumya's point where it's now an art as opposed to a science, right?
Definitely.
And
it's actually always been more art than science, at least in my estimation.
Right.
Soumya, do you agree?
Yeah, I was going to build on that, Laura, that I like the idea that you brought in the aspect of both people and technology along with the process, because one of the things, and I'm very big on the people aspect of it, where I find that culture plays a big role, and especially in that adaptation mindset that you talked about, that one needs to be in that adaptation mindset. I remember this presentation at the Vision Conference where they were talking about software programs that are forever in beta. That means that it's a journey rather than it's a goal. Of course, the goal's there, but the goal keeps moving, and one has to have that adaptive mindset that I'm going to have to continue to learn and adapt to this constant change.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
And if I may add to that, it requires leadership, and it also requires leadership support at all levels and probably at the highest level of the organization in order to succeed.
So what you're saying, Soumya, is the adaptation pretty much starts with tone at the top.
Yes, it should be a tone at the top, and it should be it should not be seen as outside. Change cannot be managed from the outside. Change should be integral to the company's culture and being able to adopt and learn as part of growing.
Now, we were talking about people, process, and technology, and I know that's a well-understood adage and phrase, but I think there's another element to it these days, and I think we're talking about it, but I think it needs to be spelled out, and because there's 4 elements. You could say 5 because you can put strategy in there too, because you have strategy, but people and process and information and technology. Technology is certainly helps manage information, but a lot of organizations are dealing with trying to integrate a variety of information sources. Some have multiple GRC platforms and risk solutions and compliance solutions need to integrate that piece of it. But there's, integration of external databases, loss databases, for example, or politically exposed persons and sanctions and watch lists and a variety of things. And so organizations need what I call 360-degree, situational awareness, just to really understand the contextual awareness of all the different components of GRC across the organization. And information is critical, and being able to manage risk and compliance information, but also other business information and integrate in with third-party data sources on regulatory intelligence and risk intelligence and loss databases and things, all that becomes critically important. And so information architecture is even more important than even just the technology architecture.
I totally agree. I mean, that's actually where you get the ability for it to all talk to each other, and where you can then put the combined pieces together to get that intelligence that you need, right? So that it's actually telling you or informing you in a way, or informing the institution in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I always feel like third parties play a very interesting role in this as well, and I'm happy you touched on that, Michael. And that takes me to my next question. What is the right organizational structure and approach for GRC for the organization to be agile in a changing environment? And this question goes to you, Michael.
It's what I alluded to in my opening comments, that particularly for large organizations, I think it needs to be a federated architecture. There can be a role that leads the collaboration and really guides it, like risk management or compliance, and that varies by industry sometimes. But GRC strategy, it really requires that we have different departments working together collaboratively. And if we have one department that really bears all the power in things, we end up with a GRC program that other departments are frustrated with and feel like they're being force-fed something and causing them to manage like risk and compliance to the lowest common denominator in some cases. And so I think it's really much a federated approach where we have a collaboration across a range of roles in a committee, even if we have one group that leads that committee.
And my next question, with that in mind, is to you, Soumya. What is the role of technology in GRC? And we mentioned technology earlier. Laura, you touched on it. So, Soumya, how does technology enable organizations to be agile in a dynamic and changing environment?
Yes, thanks, Aarti. I mean, the old adage is technology, just like any other areas of the organization, is the enabler. It should not be the driver. But where technology can be useful, it can be a nuisance also if, again, we do not have all the other components that we've talked about today, namely the strategy, the culture, the people, the processes aligned. But where technology comes into play is really, making things faster, better, richer in terms of the ability to integrate. And it's when I say technology, I kind of assume the data component within it, because data really plays a significant part of understanding the holistic picture of risk and being able to join together. But then you combine with that the components of streamlining your processes through automation, using workflow capabilities, reporting capabilities, visualization, that really adds a powerful dimension of how risk management can become an effective decision support system for executives, for leadership to make critical decisions on the business. So technology does play an important role, and today we've been talking about siloed processes and siloed technologies and why convergence is important. You can understand that when a leader of an organization or a senior executive has to make decisions based on different data points that come across multiple different technology platforms like IT risk management or third-party risk management or operational risk management or compliance risk management, and put all of that together, what ends up happening is a lot of time and effort is spent in kind of assuming that those different pieces of information or data points together into a concerted view that helps to inform something. Otherwise, that data doesn't convert to information. And that's where technology can play a significant role in saying or in aligning up with the different, across the different risk programs.
And Laura, since you mentioned this, since you touched on this point earlier about technology, I'm just curious to know, at IBM, is there anything that you do differently when it comes to technology, or any type of best practice that you have in place?
Well, I mean, in terms of the platform, is, and Sumya's company uses the Open Pages platform. But I mean, from a technology perspective, there's definitely different ways you can approach, but there's obviously kind of good practice ways that you approach. And I mean, I think that's a lot of what we've been talking about here today.
Great. And with that in mind, how do you measure the value of an organization's GRC strategy, as Michael mentioned earlier, and Soumya, across people, processes, and technology?
Yeah, measurement of value, that's an interesting kind of thought. So I mean, basically, what are your outputs? I mean, do you feel that from an institution perspective that you people understand? I can think, just keep talking back to the same themes, that your institution, your people understand their role, what they should be doing, how they interact with the controls and processes, how it impacts risk. Are they actually encouraged to even think outside the box and, come forward with any kind of new ideas and ways to manage, risk? And so in terms of the kind of value, I mean, I think the value is if you're finding that you're within your own institution, that how you deal with GRC or your governance, risk, and compliance program as an institution, are you finding that you're experiencing less in terms of kind of events that happen to you that are unexpected? Is the value in the institution that people feel like they all understand what they're supposed to be doing as part of this type of a program? Or even if they're not a risk or compliance individual, do even the kind of people doing the normal business jobs understand where they fit? So to me, it's kind of ensuring that we're all, kind of singing from the same songbook, right? Everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, and they understand even what the risk, again, I'll come back to risk appetite of the institution is. They're managing to it, and people really understand, where the value is in the continued evolution of such a program as well.
Those are excellent points. I do a lot of value studies for solution providers as well as organizations that are doing business cost justification for GRC strategies. I measure value around 3 angles, and each angle has 2 core elements and many things that branch out from there. The first part is the efficiency. Before, it took us this amount of resources, whether it's human capital or financial capital, so time saved, dollars saved. And now it takes us X amount of resources. So it's the efficiency idea there. So in that context, again, you have the two elements of human capital efficiency being time, and financial efficiency at the end of the day, dollars, or pick whatever currency. Then the second element is effectiveness, the design effectiveness and the operating effectiveness. Are we more effective at risk management or control or audit? Before we could do so many audits or assessments in a period, and now we can do so much more. We have a better culture of risk, stronger culture. People are making better decisions. It's more effective. And then the third angle is agility. And that has the two elements of the agility of keeping abreast with change, which I've been talking about. But the other element, the second one, is responsiveness. So the value of, can I keep abreast of changing regulations, changing risk environment and business environment? And then the second element is responsiveness. When bad things are happening, whether they're inadvertent or malicious, how quickly can I identify them and contain them before they become bigger issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are all very good points too, Michael. I mean, it's a great way of approaching, and I think the other part is constantly evolving, right? And looking at and ensuring that we're still managing the risks that we have, right? And ensuring that we're embracing and looking at anything new, and also kind of culling out anything that maybe is not as meaningful anymore due to either technology change or changes in the ways that we run our business or what have you, right?
Yep.
Those are definitely very solid points. And Laura, you mentioned evolution and evolving. I think the next step after that is usually convergence, right? And this final question is to you, Soumya. What do we mean by convergence? Because we hear so much about this in the context of GRC. And occasionally, why is convergence so difficult?
Yeah, so convergence, and many people call it different things, integration, harmonization, and so on and so forth. Essentially, it means, for the lack of a better word, integration of various disciplines of risk management and compliance management into single sets of methodologies, processes, systems, culture. And to understand convergence, one needs to take that holistic view and align it with the core strategy. So it's not just about systems, it's not just about processes, but it's an orchestrated move towards saying, we will manage our risk, we'll manage our regulatory and other policy compliance, and we'll have a concerted set of governance flow processes holistically or in unison. And that's what compliance is all about, convergence is all about. It should start with setting of that strategy and vision. And as I had mentioned earlier, it requires leadership alignment at the highest level and the appropriate tone at the top being established and being ingrained into the culture. Why is it important? Because it helps to integrate risks across the enterprise to better support decision-making, links to business strategy, helps us to understand how the enterprise as a whole is moving along in the direction of the business objectives and goals set by leadership. And in terms of the challenges, obviously when you look at the various risk programs within a business, you have Sarbanes-Oxley, you have regulatory compliance, you may have depending on the industry, HIPAA or certain types of specific compliance programs being stood up. And traditionally how these compliance programs have come up is from the ground up. So they've been, incubated with very specific requirements and processes. And when these programs grow up to a large level where they're managed at the enterprise level and then come to the table from a convergence standpoint, you find that they differ from each other, or there's a diverse set of processes and systems and values and objectives that are very hard to align together. You're almost trying to put a square peg into a round hole. Also in terms of, especially I've seen this in terms of some of the compliance programs, especially where they're driven by regulatory expectations, those regulatory expectations don't align themselves. And I asked this question to one of my peers who at the Vision conference who was talking about, getting alignment between their various regulatory compliance programs. I said, how were you able to do that? Because in the United States, especially if you're in the finance and banking industry, that's almost like you got to turn from regulator to regulator to regulator and have it be expected to hear a different set of program requirements. So, that itself can become a challenge. And then obviously you mix with that the business's internal objectives and managing that with what the lines of business think from what it takes for the company to be successful. It can become a challenge. Earlier in his slides, Michael talked about the federated versus the centralized approach. And convergence doesn't mean necessarily a centralized approach. Convergence doesn't necessarily mean that everything needs to be brought under one single organization. It means working in unison and having that balance of what is the right level that can be managed locally within the lines of business versus at a corporate level is really the art of convergence. And I think a key challenge is to understand the interrelationship of where the risk programs intersect with each other. Even in certain cases, what is a risk for some risk program can be an impact to other risk programs, and vice versa. What's a risk for something else can be a cause or can be caused by other risks that are in other risk programs. So that's why convergence is both important, but that is also one of the biggest challenges in understanding convergence. And often it starts with defining common risk taxonomies or common risk languages across the organization, but even getting people to sit at a table and agree on a common set of objectives is hard.
Yeah, I agree with you, Soumya. I think even getting them to agree on what you call the thing, whether it's identifying the taxonomies or the frameworks to start, right? Just because of the culture and perhaps some of the history behind it, how the way that people have always talked about things has been a little bit different between some departments and things like that. So I do think that also kind of it gets to be a part of the challenge. I agree with you.
Michael, is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of convergence?
I guess I become a particular on grammar sometimes, but convergence has had a more of a tone when I've seen it when GRC of consolidation, and to me that's not quite what we're aiming for. But we've also discussed the terms of integration and things too. To me, I prefer the term integration over convergence because convergence has some level of consolidation that concerns me because that could go too far. The other thing that was mentioned, it was harmonization, and harmonization is actually a word I used to use for GRC a lot. But then I stepped back and said, again, that's not the perfect fit. I actually like to use the term orchestration because if everybody's in harmony, well, at times we need discord. We need somebody to be stomping up and down and saying, wait a second, have we thought about this? Are we serious? And so we need to have that discord at times. And that's why I think orchestration is a better word than harmonization. If you take a good piece of classical music, and you'll have a lot of great elements of beautiful harmony, but it wouldn't be a great piece of classical music if it was all about harmony. There's that discord and tension and then resolution. And in a GRC context, you have different roles. For the last several years, we've been seeing a big push by government and regulators to have compliance report outside of legal, because basically legal's got the duty to deny and protect, while compliance has got a duty to discover and fix. And these can work at odds with each other. I already mentioned earlier, audit. Audit shouldn't be managing GRC, because then it's the fox guarding the hen house, because audit needs to provide assurance on GRC. And so there's proper balances and things too, and these roles need to be able to step up and feel free to speak up and provide tension when it is needed, because tension can be a good thing in the right context. And so just my bizarre thoughts on it.
No, I like the term orchestration, though, Michael. I think it's a very good term, and it does speak to having even some kind of different kind of theme lines that actually, to your point, which I like the way you put it, it kind of comes to a common resolution, which is, I think, a very nice way of putting it. And I mean, I think convergence has been talked about for years. I mean, I certainly can remember it being talked about even back like about over a decade ago, right? And to your point, it's kind of had some evolution in the way that we would term it. But the orchestration piece is, I actually like that very much. I think it's a very nice way. And you're right, there has to be some tension between some things because, after all, the businesses are in business to kind of make money and things like that, and so you keep the institution afloat, right? And so at some points there's bound to be tension between certain areas. It's just so long as it's done with some kind of maybe organized chaos or whatever you want to call it, I think is a good way to think of it.
Yeah, this is Soumya. I will add to that the key thing to ask sometimes is to take a step back and say, what do we want to do? What do we want to do as an organization? Ultimately, it should go back to the business objectives, and that's what most organizations fail to understand and do. We tend to get so caught up in what's happening around us, and with regulators and multiple regulatory exams and audits and everything else, that we sometimes fail to see the forest beyond the trees and understand what's the most critical needs that we have to solve for. And we were talking about how do we realize value out of GRC. This kind of goes with the whole notion of orchestration or convergence. I mean, it shouldn't be convergence for convergence sake or orchestration for that sake of itself. We have to really understand what is the value that's driving us. What do we want to accomplish as an organization? And that should help us define a strategy. Sometimes it is not necessary that we need to put everything into one basket, whether it be a system or a platform or even processes. Sometimes they don't fit, and for those reasons, it may warrant that kind of a federated structure. But how do we keep the interlinkage between the two so that the relationships of the risks are well understood? That's something to evaluate.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. At this point, we'll have to move into our Q&A part of our session. Again, that was Soumya Chakravarti, Director of Enterprise Risk Management at Capital One, Laura Pollack, Head of GRC Product Management and Risk Content at IBM, and Michael Rasmussen, GRC Pundit at GRC 2020. If you'd like a copy of the slides just presented, you can download it from the drop-down menu on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. As mentioned earlier, now it's time for us to move into the Q&A session, and I am going to throw these questions out to you in no particular order. And the first question that came in from our audience is, someone mentioned that they really like the comments on Discord. Do you think conflict resolution instruction should be necessary in order to help orchestrate the resolution process?
I think that could definitely be beneficial at times. Just because we have Discord doesn't mean that people aren't always getting along, but that could also happen too. But being able to work through that, and in that context, make sure that all the voices are heard properly and in proper balance.
Soumya, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with it. It's again dependent on the alignment of vision, and it is much better accomplished top down through that laying the common vision at the top level rather than a bottoms up approach. If you try to get different risk programs and get them to sit at a table and agree, often that is harder than really having like a company CEO saying this is what needs to be accomplished and driving that message down into the alignment programs. That's probably what you're going to see most of the time lending to the success of the program.
And our next question, how should internal audit, compliance, and risk interact within a banking organization?
Can you say that once more?
Absolutely. How should internal audit, compliance and risk interact within a banking organization?
So you work within the banking world, so you probably have the best perspective there.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that question. So the way we see it at, not just at Capital One, but in a lot of financial services industries, are like a clear 3 lines of defense type of implementation, where you have the first line that manages the business, and then you've got second line programs like risk or compliance, and it could be operational risk, compliance risk, credit risk, etc. And then you've got a third line, which is the internal audit, which serves as the independent challenge function. So the way I see the second line programs working with the first line is setting a lot of the context, the governance program, the framework, providing the guidance, coaching, training, methodology, etc., whatever have you. And then once these first line programs get up to scale in terms of maturity, helping them along through proper oversight and challenge. So I personally work in enterprise risk management, which is a similar second line function. And part of our role is to constantly partner with the first line in providing that guidance and oversight and challenge function. On the other hand, I see audit is as more of an independent arm of the company, which can basically challenge both the first and the second line through an independent assessment. And it's really, I would provide a soccer or football analogy where your goalkeeper is really what the audit is. It's basically preventing external factors, your opposition, from scoring a goal against your team. They are the last line of defense before your goal, and being able to say, are we well guarded from a risk management? Are we effectively managing our risks? And are we over controlled or under control? Any other thoughts, Michael or Laura?
I think those are excellent perspectives.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's important that audit is that independent faction. They definitely should be protecting from the outside, but also they should be looking very critically on the inside and ensuring that what the inside is doing is actually going to ensure that kind of end result, right? So I very much agree with you, Soumya.
The one thing I would like to add is I've done a lot of consulting with medium and smaller size organizations where I've seen that audit kind of is a trailblazer in terms of setting up of leading practices for risk management, whether it be as simple as continuous auditing practices through data analytics that ultimately get moved over to the first line as monitoring practices, or just defining better guidance around how to implement controls within the business. So often audit can provide that function, but again, it should be done from an independence perspective, and we have to be careful as to not get too embroiled into where that perception of the independence and objectivity is lost.
And our last question is, do you see any inconsistencies across regulations from jurisdiction to jurisdiction? And I believe, Michael, you can answer this question.
Definitely. You have different approaches to regulatory compliance from a government perspective. So like the U.S. has predominantly been a very prescriptive checkbox approach to compliance. Tell me what I have to do and give me my get-out-of-jail-free card. While, the U.K., particularly the FSA, years ago started the the principles outcome-based compliance approach, and that's picked up by the European Union and its better regulatory policy and over the last several years. And it's not complete, because in any country you're going to find some balance of a checkbox approach versus a principle or outcome-based. But that latter approach, the outcome or principles-based approach, they're not going to be prescriptive and tell you exactly what you have to do. They're going to have to tell you what you have to achieve. Now, the way one organization might achieve it might be different from another organization. So in that context, you've got different anti-money laundering laws. some are more prescriptive and some are less prescriptive and allow more flexibility as long as you achieve the right approach. You've got, and then there's some countries that just lack, maybe anti-money laundering laws. Same thing with bribery and corruption. We've had FCPA 37 years, and it's a big issue. UK Bribery Act is fairly new in the last 5 years, and the enforcement actions are just starting to happen more. And sometimes the enforcement and approach, varies in different requirements. One of the biggest things that we've seen is like Canada's PIPEDA, Personal Information Protection Electronic Documents Act, and the conflict with the U.S. Patriot Act. And there's been a lot of cross-border sharing of personal information type issues because of Canada's concern of the Patriot Act requirements that could, expose that information.
Soumya, Laura, would you like to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, that regulatory expectation and the differences of that was what I was referring earlier, and that sometimes can put a tailspin on companies trying to align across even various compliance challenges and trying to come up with a consistent set of controls and processes that help manage those. And sometimes you just you end up with different kind of ways to very reactively address those requirements.
Yeah, I think with global CIFIs, it's a real challenge these days, simply because you are getting some differences in how to manage certain aspects. I think some of the real challenges I'm seeing that we're going to see in the more kind of near future is around also cybersecurity. Simply because there has been a very kind of reactive response to all the different things that have happened. There are the large events that have happened most recently. And so you're seeing various different government bodies and regulatory bodies come up with kind of guidelines or templates between how to, manage this type of risk and what they want institutions to do. And so, as you're seeing these in a variety of different countries and whatever, and again with companies that are dealing across borders or across oceans, I think it's going to make it a very interesting time for them to ensure that they're kind of hitting all the mark with all of these different kind of locale-based regulations.
Thank you very much, Laura. And we are almost out of time. So again, everyone, our speakers today were Soumya Chakrabarti, Director of Enterprise Risk Management at Capital One, and Laura Pollock, Head of GRC Product Management and Risk Content at IBM, and Michael Rasmussen, GRC Pundit, GRC 2020. And a special thanks to IBM for making this webcast possible. This webcast has been recorded and will be available sometime in the next hour or so. CPE credit is now available to subscribers for archived webcasts. Please check out our on-demand CPE library under the Webcast tab at www.complianceweek.com. Once again, to obtain your CPE credit after the presentation, wait until I finish this wrap-up and please disable your pop-up blockers in order to access the exam. The webcast will close automatically and the final examination will be presented in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to info@complianceweek.com. Again, that's info@complianceweek.com to request a copy. And this concludes our webcast. Thank you again for joining us, and goodbye.